Okay, so today we are going to talk about the human ear. Okay, and this drawing will hopefully help you understand the parts of the human ear. If you were able to do it in class, great. This is here if you need further help with it. Okay, so first off, we remember that sound is produced by longitudinal waves, and longitudinal waves have compressions and rarefactions. Now, obviously, the lines here are going to represent the compressions, the parts that are pushed together. Okay, and then we are going to have that sound be collected in what we would call the pinna of our ear. Okay, and the pinna is basically the large kind of funnel-shaped part that is outside of your head that allows those sounds to be collected and funneled into your ear, where you will then be able to translate them into something that is meaningful to you, something that is a sound that you can understand. Okay? Now, the cool thing about calling it the pinna, it's also called the auricle, but I always call it the pinna because I remember it in terms of you can pin an earring on it, okay? Because that's the part that is outside your ear. And so inside there, as those sound waves go in, they are funneled into what we would call the ear canal. Okay, so those sound waves are going into the ear, and they go through there, and they are funneled down here. Now, once they are in there, you will see that there is a lot of material in here. This is where you would find the earwax, and the earwax is used to prevent infections in the ear, to capture any sort of foreign material, okay? And it's also potentially the cause of a lot of hearing damage because people use Q-tips, jam those in there, and they press that earwax up against this next part, which is the eardrum. And if they press them up against the eardrum, that can cause hearing damage. Okay, so the eardrum kind of vibrates, okay, and it's going to start magnifying those sound waves because we need to magnify them because we're eventually going to turn them into electrical signals, okay? And behind the eardrum are three really small bones, okay? We got one called the hammer. It's kind of right in here. Okay, this is the hammer, also known as the malleus. Okay, and the hammer is one of the bones that basically when the eardrum vibrates and moves, then that causes the hammer to move as well. Okay, and when the hammer moves, then it causes the anvil to move, and the anvil is the second bone here, and the anvil shakes even just a little bit more. Okay, and the third bone is called the stirrup, and the stirrup is basically very similar to the stirrup on a saddle. It's the place where you would put your foot if you were riding a horse with a saddle. And so obviously you can see it goes from 2 little wiggles to 3 little wiggles, and then we'll have 4 little wiggles here because this one is really vibrating. And if you were to go down here, this isn't something that you need to know, but just for your own knowledge, this is the Eustachian tubes. If you have ever heard of someone getting tubes in their ears, this area right here would be where those tubes go. And they help with drainage and help you from having ear infections and things like that. So the Eustachian tube would be down there. Okay. So after we have that, then we go to what we call the cochlea. Now this, the pinna, let's do this. The pinna in the ear canal are what we would call the outer ear. Okay. Then inside here we have the hammer, the anvil, and the stirrup, Okay, so the eardrum, the hammer, the anvil, and the stirrup, let's go with this color, those are what we would call the middle ear. Okay. Okay, those are the middle ear. And now we're going to go into the inner part, which is where we would have the inner ear. Now, the inner ear has some really funky parts. And the main part we're going to talk about is called the cochlea. And the cochlea kind of looks like a snail shell. Okay? There are all sorts of loop-de-loop parts and things like that. They call those the semicircular canals. Those are used for helping you with balance and things like that, because you can... It functions very similarly to, like, if you've ever played with those levels that have the green liquid in them and the bubbles, and you try to make it so that the bubble stays in between the lines, okay? Basically, they can tell if your head is tilted one way or another, okay? And so this is something right here called the oval window. And the oval window is basically a thin membrane, kind of like the eardrum, that those vibrations from the stirrup cause it to shake. And inside the cochlea, it is filled with fluid, okay? And in that fluid, you have a whole bunch of what we would call hair cells. So let's do a little zoom out here. So we're going to take this little section right here, and we're going to zoom it out like this, okay? So instead of seeing something like this, okay, you're going to see it much clearer. Each of these little cells that line the inside of the cochlea have a hair attached to them. And they are called, believe it or not, hair cells. Okay? And so, since there is fluid in the cochlea, okay, that causes those vibrations to go through a liquid instead of a gas, which means those vibrations are increased yet again. Okay? And so when they cause those hair cells to move, kind of like seaweed moving in the currents of the ocean, it triggers something in that cell that causes it to produce an electrical signal. Okay? And so those electrical signals are gathered up by what we would call the auditory nerve, auditory nerve. Okay? And those go all the way up to the brain. And the brain takes those signals and translates them into sounds that we understand, that we've heard before, sometimes even voices, okay? And so that is where we are able to hear sound, okay? So this is the cochlea. I forgot to do this, C-O-C-H-L-E-A. And let's go with... let's go with this color. So this is what we would call the inner ear. I realize that's not too different than the other one, but we'll go with it. So the cochlea, the auditory nerve, and even the oval window is part of what we would call the inner ear. Okay? Since these kind of look the same, I will, so yeah, so these are the middle ear, okay? And so, once that sound gets to your brain, then you are able to understand what's being said about it, okay? It's a very, very delicate process that happens split second. It's incredibly important that we are paying attention and keeping track of our hearing and keeping it safe and healthy. And these are the hair cells. Okay, and it makes electrical signals. So we can say electrical signals go to the brain. All right, so that is the human ear for you. Hopefully this has helped you to understand it. If you need to go back and listen to this again, feel free to do so. But this is kind of what you are expected to know, okay, the parts of the ear. So hopefully you guys are with it, and I will talk to you later. No, I don't want to erase that. Trying to get out of the video. Okay.